Amen. Well, we are talking about a little bit of a heavier topic. I try not to make it heavy. I don't know why Liv said I always get the heavy topics. Maybe it's because I'm British. It's all rainy and gloomy over there, so I just give the British guy the tough ones, I guess. But we're in a short series called Why Christianity. It's right there. And if you're new here, I just want to catch you up to speed. The goal of this series, it's a short series, has been to put our thinking caps on for a moment and to really think about how Christianity answers life's biggest questions, and to resource you in this room to go out and have those conversations, hopefully with friends, family, workers, anyone around you. I don't know if you've noticed this, but life has some big questions. Big questions like this. Meaning in life. What is my meaning or purpose on this earth? Suffering. How do I handle suffering? What is the mechanism or the belief system I use to handle things that go wrong in my life? Identity. What is my identity formed and surrounded by? And how does that identity hold up when there's times of challenge? Satisfaction, happiness. Where do I find happiness? Where do I find satisfaction? And then moral judgments. How do I determine in my life what is right and what is wrong? And whether you're a Christian here today or not, we all face those big questions. The question is not whether we will face them. The question is, what are we going to believe? And on what grounds are we going to believe it? And I want to begin with a quote today from Malcolm Guite. He's a British poet, and he's captured it so well, this tension of life's biggest questions and what we're trying to do with this series. And he says this: so the question really about the Christian faith is whether it makes more sense of the world as we actually live it. And if the alternatives are telling us that you have no real personhood, no real soul, you're just the unwinding of an enzyme, how is it that you actually experience choice and the peril of choice, and you experience responsibility, and you experience beauty, and your experience of beauty is essentially transcendent rather than limit? And so what we are trying to do with this series, if you're asking why Christianity, why are we doing this series? We are trying to open up life's biggest questions, trying to kind of unveil them for a minute. And today we want to look at a specific question, and that question is this: how do we determine what is right and what is wrong? How do we determine what is right or wrong? And said another way, how does Christianity answer that question? And how does that answer compare to other answers to that question? Making sense? Not too heavy yet? Okay, let's get in. I first stole at the age of 8. There, I said it. A thief among your midst. It's true. I did it. I knew what I was doing, and I still did it anyway. In my school, growing up in England, we kind of had this shared toy chest. So keep me away from city kids today. We had this shared toy chest, and in it was all these toys, and you could come in the morning, all the kids would rush in, and they would go to grab their favorite toy. And my class in particular had a favorite toy that everyone would try to get to first. And even though I lived 5 minutes away from school, I could never get to school early enough to get first to that toy and play with it. And the person who had that toy, they were always the favorite that day. They were always the one who was showing off. I got the toy, here it is, look at me, and everyone would follow them, flock around them like birds. And I went home that day and I thought, as an 8-year-old, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to get there first. But then another thought entered my mind. How about I don't get there early? How about I stay late and do something about this? And so I stayed as everyone was packing. I kind of edged closer to this toy chest. I got the favorite toy and I put it in my pocket. And then I went home that day and I thought, this is great. I get this toy all to myself. I'm going to play with it. Tomorrow I'm going to be the coolest kid. And I got to school the next day and everyone was looking for the toy. Where's the toy gone? Where's the toy gone? And here it was all along. And I didn't get it out because I was scared, because I knew I'd done something wrong, because I had stolen a toy to get all the attention for myself, and that was wrong. And I use that story to illustrate a simple point. Who or what in life do we look to determine what is good and what is bad? To inform us of what a decision we are making, if it's good or bad. And a better question is, how do we know? How can we tell the difference between right and wrong? For some of us, we all have a way to answer that question. For some of us, it's the government, it's influential people, it's celebrities, it's our families, it's our parents, it's the way we were raised. For some of us, it's God. He determines what's right or wrong. Perhaps it's something else. And for some of us in this room, maybe it's even us that determines that. We get to determine what's right and wrong. But my point is this: all of us in this room reach a critical point in life. We reach a point in life where, like me as a young boy, we are holding a stolen toy in our hand. On the one hand, we know what we should do, which is not to take the toy or to return it at least. But on the other hand, there's a part of us that wants to do something, even if we know it's right or wrong. And that question never really leaves us. And that question is this: what is morality? It's a big word. What is good and bad? What is right and wrong? The English word, morality, derives from the Latin noun mos. Can you say mos? There you go, learning a bit of Latin today. And what that word means is manner, character, or proper behavior. And morality is a word thrown around today. We throw it around on social media. We throw it around at work. We are told something's moral or it's amoral. We're told something's good or it's bad, that this decision is good or bad. And we intuitively in this room, regardless of whether we're a Christian or not, we know there is a way of life that would appear to be good. These decisions lead to a good life. And we know on the other side that there is decisions, things that lead to the opposite, wrong or bad. But how do we really know what that is? How do we really know what good and bad is? And that question's been grappled with for centuries. It's not a new question. Philosophers over the ages have always been asking this one question: what is the good life? What does it mean to lead a good life? How do we determine good and bad, and who gets to do that? And the answers to that question over time are soaked into the fabric of our culture today. And so what I want to do with you guys, with the time we have, is quite simple, and it's this. I want to show you how the world has attempted to answer that question. What is good? What is bad? How can we tell? And hopefully show and contrast how the gospel answers that question, how Jesus answers that question more uniquely than any other way. And then leave you with all the data to see which one you think is more compelling. In other words, at the end of the day, when we compare these two views, which one would you put your life on? And I want to ask you today a question. If I were to ask you today, do you think our society has become more moral or less moral? I wonder how you'd answer that question. It's a rhetorical question, so just pause, hold your horses. But however you answer that question, is society more moral or less moral today at this point in time? It depends entirely on what you're measuring against. And that's exactly the question we started with. Who or what in this life gets to determine what is called right and wrong? And over the centuries in our culture, the answer to that question has kept changing and changing and changing. And let's talk about how. If you didn't know, we kind of hinted at it in the video, Christianity began as a fringe movement of maybe 100 people, a room like this, following a person named Jesus, this obscure Jewish rabbi. Who knows? But within 3 centuries, around 300 years, despite persecution on those people, having no political power, no army, no wealth, no popularity, it became the dominant faith of the Roman world. Sociologists estimate this, that it grew from around 40 AD, around 1,000 people, to 300 AD, to 6 million people. 10% of the Roman Empire. And for the next 1,500 years, Christianity didn't just survive, it defined the moral imagination of the West. To use our analogy earlier, what was going on in the culture of that time is, me stealing the toy is wrong. We all say yes. But it was stealing the toy was wrong in that culture because God said stealing was wrong. And so the defining moral landscape for the world for centuries after Christianity started was God. People looked to God to define morality, right and wrong. But then something shifted. Something interesting shifted. The Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries proposed something different. That reason alone, not revelation, not God, could ground morality and meaning. And this was pioneered by thinkers like Descartes and Immanuel Kant. But aside from the history, the Enlightenment said this: we don't need God. We don't need revelation to find the standard for right and wrong. Human reason, thinking hard, thinking well, can discover it. No God is required. And this was a dramatic shift in how humanity began to think and determine what is right and wrong. See, for centuries, the dominant answer to that question was to look to God. God's going to give us the answers, right and wrong. Listen to him, follow him. But in this period of time, that answer began to change. And so let's go back to our original analogy. Me stealing the toy is wrong. But now all of a sudden, it's not wrong because God says so. It's wrong because reason alone tells me I wouldn't want to live in a world where everyone steals. So I better not steal because I don't want a world like that. And so for 2 centuries, this shifted our culture's thinking about good and evil. And for 2 centuries, we increasingly trusted reason, education, science, and progress alone, no God, to make humanity better, to define morality. But the 20th century rolls around, and the 20th century shatters everything. The belief that intellectual and technological progress would make us better at knowing and doing right hit a wall. World War I was the first crack. And then World War II came, the deadliest war in history. And at the center of World War II, the Holocaust, intentional, efficient, organized genocide, carried out by one of the most educated and cultured nations in Europe. And in the space of just 31 years, 2 wars took 100 million lives, making the 20th century the most bloodiest century compared to all 19 previous combined. Something shifted. And this was the terrifying realization that progress and reason alone were not quite enough. Human beings could be more educated, more technologically advanced, more organized, and still use all of it for extraordinary evil. And when human reason failed to prevent all of this history, Western culture stopped trusting in standards altogether, and we turned inward. And the question began to shift from what is the moral standard of the world, what is good and right, to who gets to define the standard. And whoever is defining the standard, what's in it for them for defining the standard? Why should I listen to them? And eventually that suspicion produced another question. And it was this: if I can't ultimately in this world look to God, can't look to tradition, can't look to reason to tell me how to live, to understand good and bad, where do I look? Where do I look to find the standard of this world for right and wrong? And increasingly, the answer became this: within. My feelings, my desires, my identity, my truth. And this was the final move in our cultural history today into what we might call late modernity. And this is a period marked by individualism and reflexivity. And what we mean by that is this: I don't just decide in myself what's right and wrong once and say, okay, this is how I'm going to live, sorted. We just keep changing the standard as it suits us and as we change. And the authority for determining right and wrong doesn't get relocated to a person or God or an external figure. It comes from me, because this is the key question. Who can I trust more than myself? I become my own authority, my own standard, my own God. And this whole period of time, up until this point we find ourselves in 2026, is famously summarized by Friedrich Nietzsche. And he said this: God is dead. God remains dead. This is the crucial part. And we have killed him. Everyone take a sigh. That's the heavy part over. This is where we find ourselves today. Today we say things quite loosely, if we're honest. We post on Facebook, we put it on social media. We say things like this: you do you. Live your truth, man. You only live once. You do you, your way, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. And it sounds on the exterior like freedom. It sounds like freedom, you do you. But notice it's the same problem, just wrapped up in a different way. Because this is the tension we find ourselves in culture today in 2026. If morality, what is good and what is true, what is right about the world, is only what I feel, and what I feel changes as I change, when your truth and my truth collide, who's going to win? Who's really right? And the only way to settle that tension ultimately comes down to power. Who's more violent? Who's more stronger? Who's louder? Who's better at speaking out loud? And we haven't escaped the question that we want to fix, which is, how do we determine what's right and wrong? If it's just your truth versus my truth, we're not going anywhere. We're just back to where we started. And the key question that we want to ask is this: what kind of life does that lead to? What kind of life does that lead to? We're still asking the same question. What is right and wrong, and who gets to define it? Only this time, we're more confused, we're more exhausted, and we're more divided. It sounds like 2026 to me. And we see this in culture, conflicting visions of good and evil with constant arguments, constant division. My truth versus your truth. And where has that left us? Is there something objective, something outside of us that actually can define good and bad in a way that is unique? And among all of this stands a conversation. And this is the conversation between a man and a person called Jesus. And I want to read you that conversation. It's found in Mark 12. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. That sounds like 2026 to me. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind and all your strength. And the second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said to him, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared ask him any more questions. I know I felt like that before. You're just like, okay, no more questions, Jesus. Checkmate. What does this passage have to do with morality? The man in this passage, speaking to Jesus, wanted to know the answer to our question. Of all the commandments, which is the most important? In other words, what is truly right and wrong behind all the laws, behind all the thoughts, all the philosophy, all the reasoning, all the debate? Jesus, you're standing before me, so you tell me, what is the most important? What is the thing I should bet my life on? And the Jewish people here, in this context of this scripture, found themselves in a really interesting point of history. See, the Jewish people had all the laws. If you kind of tally up and total all the number of laws, the Jewish people had 613 laws telling them what good and bad is about, showing them what morality is, right and wrong. And yet behind all of that guidance, behind the 613 laws, they still couldn't get it. They still didn't understand. They were as lost as we were today. And this is the tension. The law itself, all of those laws that God gave to Israel, they weren't the problem. The law was God's gift to these people because it revealed his character and showed his people what life with him should and could look like. The problem was what human beings did with it. We distorted it. We changed its shape. And we still tend to today distort morality, good and bad, in two directions. On the one side is what we would call moralism or legalism. And this is the tension where we just use all the rules to prove that I'm better than this person because they're not keeping all the rules, but I'm keeping them all. So don't be like them, be like me because I'm really good. Or I add rules, I tweak them, and I compare myself to others, and I try to justify myself through my performance. In other words, we keep all the rules. We understand what right and wrong is. We keep all the tensions, we keep all the laws, all the registrations, but we miss the true intention of them. We just bypass them. That was the danger the Pharisees fell into repeatedly in the Gospels. But on the other side is kind of what we would say relativism or rejection. It's where we just say, well, I'm just going to ignore the whole thing because this seems really difficult and complex. So I'm going to decide what's truly important. Why do I need laws and regulations? I'm just going to determine everything. I'm going to decide what's right for me. As long as it doesn't hurt anyone, I'm good with that. Who needs God? Who needs the standard when I can define the standard? And notice the responses. We have moralism and relativism, and both have the same issue. And it's this: both put me at the center. In different ways, both of us are just keeping ourselves at the center. And see, both have a view of morality, but it's a malnourished view. And this is the reality for every one of us in this room and online, wherever we find ourselves today. We're all just kids holding on to stolen toys, and we don't know what to do. But here comes somebody called Jesus. And here's what's fascinating about this piece of scripture. The man wants to know, what's really important? Tell me, what's really important? I want to hear it. He's seeking truth. Tell me. And Jesus doesn't answer the man with a new rule, doesn't answer him with an app, doesn't answer him with more regulations, more standards, or a big checklist. He doesn't answer him with some complex philosophy or reason, saying, just really think about it really hard, you'll figure it out, have a go. And he doesn't answer with just reason alone. Because as we've shown from history, reason can tell you what's logically consistent, but it cannot compel you to do right. And he doesn't say, it's just you, man, figure it out. You do you, your truth, have a go. It's something different, and I hope we can catch it today. Jesus' answer to the tension of the human heart, every one of us throughout history, how do we really know what right and wrong is? And actually do that is completely unique. And Jesus says something that no one would really expect because it's so simple. He says, you really want to know how to determine what is right and wrong in this world, and do that. You love God with everything you have. Okay, what else? Well, you love your neighbor too as yourself. Okay, what else? That's it. 2 things. So simple that we could just brush past because it feels so simple it can't be right. See, Christianity does not say that doing good, goodness, is simply a list of rules that God invented because he was bored. Goodness flows from the character of God. And so morality is neither something that I invent for myself, nor just a list of rules that I should try really hard to follow because that seems to be a good life. Goodness, fundamentally good, is grounded in the character of a personal God, which means this in Jesus' statement: living a good life, doing right, not doing wrong, is fundamentally relational. Love God and love people. And that sounds very abstract. Okay, love God with all your heart. You can try to do that. Love neighbor. Okay, I'll try to do that. But how do we actually begin to live that to a point where it actually changes us? Where it's not moralism and legalism when we're just beating ourselves up. And it's just not relativism where we're just doing what we want all the time without being changed. How do we begin to live that kind of life in 2026 in this city? Notice what Jesus is saying here. He's grounding morality on a relational basis. So what does that mean? Let's unpack that. To actually be a moral person, truly moral, the greatest commandment Jesus gives us is to love God with everything we have. What does that mean? It means that's what leads to living in right and avoiding wrong. In other words, Jesus is saying this: you do not keep the law of God by trying to keep the law of God. You learn to do what's right by first doing one thing: loving God with everything you have. Why? Because as you begin to love God truly as he is, for who he is, his character, you begin to love the way he does things. You begin to love what he loves and hate what he hates. Not from motive, not from what's in it for me, not so I can look really good to my friends on church on Sunday, not so I can go outside and start a podcast and tell everyone about it. For one thing, loving God. What does that mean? It means you begin to do what's right out of a different heart. Let me break it down with an example so it's not so abstract. Been married 3 years. And if I were in this room to say I really love my wife with all that I am, heart, soul, mind, I love my wife. But then I either do the things she asks me to do because I feel obligated, or because I want to get something from her, or because I want to look really good as the husband on Sunday, or I just completely go the other side and I just ignore what she wants me to do. She's saying, could you do this? And I was like, nah, I'm good. You do you. Truth. Both are deficient and guilty of the same problem. Both sides. One thing, true love for her. And I end up not doing these things for her because my motive is wrong. See, if I love my wife truly, honestly, for who she is and nothing more, then I will naturally begin to do the things she wants and asks for out of love. Not from motive, not because I want to be the top 10 husband, get that anniversary gift locked in, motorcycle, good vibe, and not because I just want to do everything I want to do, so I'm maybe just going to do some of the things I'm just going to ignore. But because I love her, I begin to do the things naturally and routinely for her because of my love for her. And I want you to catch this today. The Christian life is not this. I really want to do these things, but I know I shouldn't, so I won't. That's not the Christian life. Christian life with God is this. God's love for me and my love for him is so real, so genuine, so deep, that I begin to do what is right, naturally and routinely, because his love has got a hold of me in such a way that I begin to do these things naturally and routinely, not by compulsion, not because it says so in the Bible, but because I love God, so I'm going to do what he wants me to do. And as I love him, as I begin this process, I begin to slowly love what he loves. And I begin to hate what he hates. And one thing has changed fundamentally: my heart. And as we've shown, hopefully, through the little history of culture up until now, the problem with our world's approach to right and wrong, to morality, is it never really addresses the real problem. This little ticker. We've tried so hard over the years to legislate morality, to enforce it on people, or just to forget it altogether. Who needs a standard anyway? And all of those things forgot the most crucial thing involved in this process: my heart. And if all of our progress towards right and wrong, living a good life, is centered around what's in it for me, it's bound to fail. And I want you to catch this in the scripture. Notice what the man says back to Jesus. He says, really good teacher, loving God and neighbor is more important than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices. Now, the word more important there, it's not really coming across there. The word actually means exceeds. And so the man is not just agreeing with Jesus, he's realizing something. His view is shifting. See, the sacrifices in the Old Testament, they seem a bit weird to us, but really what the sacrifices were gifts of God's grace to Israel. But the man is realizing even sacrifice can't turn a divided heart into one that perfectly loves God. I could sacrifice all day and night, and it doesn't really change what's going on in here. And if the law, God's law, is ultimately calling us to a total, all-consuming love for God and neighbor, the problem runs much deeper than a few broken rules. We need more than religious performance. We need our hearts changed. It's why Paul says this in Romans 3. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our own sin. What is Paul talking about there? You can do all the works of the law you want, but really it ain't changing this thing right here. And you're not going to be justified by all of that. And all of us in this room, whether we are a Christian in here or not, we feel this tension that there is a way to life that would seem right. And there is a way to life that would seem wrong. And we just can't get it right. We want to put back the stolen toy, but we also want to keep it for ourselves a little bit. And no amount of law or legislation or rules can solve that problem, that tension. And here we have Jesus unfolding God's plan all along, that God's solution to the age-old human problem is not more progress or reason or rules alone. It's getting in behind the surface and changing what's really the issue: our hearts. Christianity is not about doing the right things and trying really hard to avoid the wrong things. It is about fundamentally being changed from the inside out so that we can do the right thing, not because we should, but because we want to. Because our loves have changed, our hearts have changed, and that's real morality. We are changed, and because of that, our lives begin to change too. And this is when Jesus says something remarkable. Feel the tension in the conversation. The man's getting it. He's going, okay, so it begins with loving God with everything I have and loving my neighbor. Man, that's really different. Okay, it's more than just sacrifices, Jesus. I'm with you. Gets to a point, and Jesus drops this line. You're not far. You're not far from the kingdom of God now. Not far meaning two things. First, this man has moved. He was far from the kingdom, but now he's not far. He's moved slowly. He's not defending himself anymore. He's not using his own excuses, his own reason, his truth, his way. He's seeing what Jesus is speaking about here. And secondly, not far meaning he's not there yet. He's not there yet. He sees the problem that Jesus is illustrating, that no amount of sacrifices can change this thing here. Jesus is hinting at something. He sees the tension. He sees the problem. But what's the solution? What's the real solution that's going to start this new process off? What is the solution? And I want you to notice this. Notice where this conversation takes place. This conversation between this man and Jesus takes place right inside the temple courts. Now, if you're not familiar with Old Testament history, the temple courts is where people would bring those sacrifices we just talked about and offer them up for their sins so that they could get square with God, so to speak. And so imagine these two people, Jesus and this man, having this conversation, and all around them there's just these animals being sacrificed because people are trying to get right with God with what they know. And right in the middle of this conversation, right in the temple courts, as this is happening around him, this man realizes loving God, loving neighbor, is more important than all of these things. And he realizes that all of these sacrifices can't fix the real issue of the broken heart. He realizes we need something more. So what's the solution? And unbeknownst to this man, the solution is standing right in front of him the whole conversation. A person called Jesus. The one sacrifice that could and will actually cover what burnt offerings and real sacrifices could not. Jesus' death on a cross and resurrection. Do you see what Jesus is doing here for the human condition? I want you to catch this. On the cross, Jesus dies. In his death, Jesus is abandoned. He's in agony. He's gaining absolutely nothing for himself. But on the cross, Jesus is still doing what he's teaching this man here, loving God, fundamentally with everything he has. Not to get anything back, not to get a new house, not to get the 401k pension plan that's really good rates and returns, not because it would earn Jesus anything. It would actually cost him everything. For the first and only time in history, someone loved God in such a way with nothing to gain, purely because of who God is. That was Jesus' heart. And that's the moment that the very thing the law asked us for, but none of us could give, Jesus fulfills the law perfectly through his obedience and love for God. And love for neighbor went further than as yourself. Love for neighbor became he loved us more than himself, all the way to the cross. Everything Jesus was teaching this man, the law was about, Jesus himself did. Not as a teaching, not as philosophy, but as a real sacrifice in our place. And this is the tension. We're still standing here holding the toy. We've still got the toy in our hands. And all of a sudden, someone else has stepped in and they've settled the debt that we couldn't pay. They've put the toy back for us. And they've led us by the hand to begin to do that for ourselves. And this is where Jesus does something completely unique. Christianity does something completely unique. Jesus dismantles both of the ways we've tried to, in this room and as a culture, deal with right and wrong. To the person who says, I'm just going to decide for myself what's right, Jesus just says it plainly. You can't be your own God. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Just look at history. And he says to the person who feels like, I can't trust anyone who puts morality on me or tells me this is right or this is wrong. I can't trust them. They need to go away. He says to them, you can trust me. Look at what I've done for you. And to the person who's desperately trying to be good, desperately trying to be good enough, they see right and wrong and they're like, I got to live up to that, but it's a crushing weight. How am I going to do it? Jesus says, you can't do it. That's why I've done it for you. You can't perform your way into the kingdom. Doing the right things for the wrong reasons isn't love. And both issues with our answer to the question of morality, both sides, are answered and dismantled by the same thing: grace. Grace says you're really not as good as you think you are. I hate to break it to you, you're just a kid holding the stolen toys, trying to figure life out. You're not as good as you think you are. You're broken, you're in a sinking ship, you're in trouble. What do you want to do about it? You can't be your own God, because if what you're really searching for is truth, you can't be the one who decides what truth is. And you can't earn your way to God either. It'll never be enough. Grace says nothing will ever be enough. But grace, on the same side of the coin, says this: despite all of that truth, you are more loved, more accepted, more wanted, more desired than you could ever dream of. And do you see what that does to us as humans? The first destroys pride. Grace destroys our pride. And secondly, it destroys fear. The first humbles me. When we first hear grace and we recognize it, it humbles us because we realize we're just kids standing there with stolen toys. We can't fix ourselves. We need a changed heart. What are we going to do about it? But the second changes us because it destroys fear. Because at the same time as that's happening, you are more loved, more desired, more wanted, more encouraged than you could ever dream of. And so you have nothing to fear. And that's what grace does. It changes the heart. And a heart changed by grace begins to do what Jesus described: love God and love people. Not perfectly, not instantly, but increasingly. And the team can join me as I close. We began with the story as me, as an 8-year-old boy, holding on to something stolen that he knew wasn't his. And in his mind, he's thinking, what do I do? Parents said I shouldn't steal. Here I am, toys in the pocket. Do I give it back and confess that I stole it? Do I hold on to it and just keep it? Do I bury it, try to hide it? What's right and what's wrong? And how do I know? And Christianity gives us this answer that I believe is more unique and more needed than ever before in our culture. It gives an answer that is deeper than try harder, and deeper than do whatever you feel. There really is good in this world because there really is a God. And we have failed to love him. And we fail to love others as we should. But before Jesus ever asks us to love him perfectly, he shows us how completely and perfectly he has loved us. And grace begins turning the heart that wants to keep the toy into the heart that can finally want to and can give it back. Jesus says to the man, you're not far from the kingdom. Notice what he doesn't say. You've arrived. Congrats. Prize is yours. He says you're close. And maybe that's where you are today or online. You're standing on the edge. You see that living your truth isn't really working. It's kind of a disaster waiting to happen. But you also see that moralism, legalism, religious performance, just faking it till you make it, is a dead end. That ain't going to do it either. And you see that Jesus offers you something completely different, but you still have questions. You're close. If that's you, I want to say this. You're in the right place. Mao and Teo just spoke about Alpha. And if you're exploring these deep questions, and today was like a little step for you, little closer to the kingdom, join us at Alpha. I promise you, you won't regret it. You will find people who have been through the same path that you have been through. And I promise you, you will not find moralism and legalism. No one's going to slap you over the head with a copy of the New Testament. But it's also not going to be, just do what you want and figure it out. That's what we're all trying to do. You will be captivated by the beauty of one thing: Jesus.